My name is Eloise Russo. I'm 34 years old, a sergeant first class in the United States Army. But right now, at my own sister's birthday party, everything I dedicated my life to felt like a punchline. Mark, my brother-in-law, held his beer up and bellowed to his friends, "All right, everyone, what's the call sign for an Army Queen of the Office? The Governor of Clipboards?" A roar of laughter erupted, mixing with the smell of barbecue and the oppressive humidity of a North Carolina summer afternoon. My sister Rachel laughed too, a flimsy hand over her mouth in a gesture of fake delicacy. But the thing that truly shattered my heart was when I looked to my mother and she just shook her head, her eyes begging me to stay silent, pleading with me not to make a scene. They thought I would just swallow it, again. But they didn't know they had just lit the fuse on a charge that had been packed tight over 12 years of service. They were about to hear a name they could never have imagined. If you've ever had to make yourself small so someone else could feel big, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this is the story of reclaiming your honor when your own family tries to strip it away. The North Carolina sun beat down on the hood of my Jeep, the heat radiating through the windshield. Just an hour ago, that same sun had felt like a spotlight of approval, glinting off the freshly polished brass on my Army service uniform. The ASU jacket was still perfectly pressed, the fabric crisp against my skin. In my mind, I could still feel the weight of the commendation medal the colonel had pinned on my chest. His words about unwavering dedication and logistical excellence still echoing in my ears. It was a good feeling. A solid one. The kind of pride that settles deep in your bones, earned through sleepless nights and impossible deadlines. But as I turned off the county highway onto the familiar gravel road leading to my parents' house, that solid feeling began to dissolve. It was a familiar sensation, a slow, heavy dread that seeped into me like the humidity. It felt like I was methodically unbuckling a suit of armor, piece by piece, preparing not for peace, but for a different kind of war. One fought not with strategy and orders, but with forced smiles and bitten tongues. Today will be different, I promised myself, the same lie I told every time I came home. Just smile. It's Rachel's birthday. Just enjoy the day. That promise, as always, felt impossibly fragile. I hadn't even fully killed the engine when Mom and Dad came out onto the porch. Mom's hug was first. It was quick, brittle, less of an embrace and more of a buffer. She pulled back and her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, her hand still gripping my arm. "Rachel's having such a good time, honey. Just don't do anything to set Mark off, okay?" The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. It wasn't a welcome, it was a warning. It wasn't, "We're so glad you're here," but "Please don't be a problem." The unspoken message was clear. My presence, in this uniform, with my rank, was a potential threat to the family's carefully constructed, paper-thin harmony. My father said nothing. He just came up behind her and placed a large, calloused hand on my shoulder, squeezing it once. I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw the familiar apology he never spoke aloud. The backyard was a caricature of a southern summer party. Pickup trucks, Ford F-150s, and Chevy Silverados were parked haphazardly on the lawn. The air was thick with the tangy, vinegar-laced smoke of pulled pork on the grill. Giant coolers sweated in the humid air, packed with Bud Light and jugs of sweet tea. In the center of it all, holding court, was Mark. He saw me, and a smug grin spread across his face. He was in the middle of bragging about some new security contract his company had landed. As I approached, he threw an arm around my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look friendly but felt heavy, possessive. He turned to his circle of friends and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Speak of the devil. Good thing we got folks like my sister-in-law pushing paper behind a desk, so guys like us can get the real work done." He gave my shoulder a condescending pat. "Isn't that right, Comrade Clipboard?" A wave of shallow, boozy laughter followed. It was a hollow sound, but it had the force of a physical blow. Rachel rushed over then, her smile a little too bright, a little too strained. "Elle, you made it." She wrapped her arms around me, but I could feel the tension in her body. I could see the conflict in her eyes, a flicker of sisterly love warring with her desperate need to keep her husband happy. I felt a pang of pity for her, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the sharp sting of her cowardice. I pulled away with a forced smile of my own. Wouldn't miss it. Happy birthday, Rach. I handed her the small, carefully wrapped gift I'd been holding. It wasn't much, but it was meaningful. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, with a small charm engraved with a set of coordinates, the exact spot by the old creek where we built a treehouse as kids, our secret hideout from the world. It was a reminder of a time when it was just us against everyone else. She took it, her eyes barely glancing at the box. Oh, thanks, Elle. You shouldn't have. Before she could even open it, Mark's voice boomed from across the yard. Rachel, babe, come settle a debate for us. Her head snapped up, her attention instantly diverted. Coming, she called out. She gave me an apologetic shrug, placed the unopened gift on a crowded picnic table, and hurried over to her husband's side. I stood there for a moment, watching my gift disappear among half-eaten plates of potato salad and a graveyard of empty beer bottles. It looked small, forgotten, just like I felt. An unwelcome guest at a party that was supposed to be a celebration of family. A memory of an old commander's words surfaced in my mind, a phrase I'd often repeated to my own soldiers. Respect isn't given, Sergeant, he used to say. It's demanded. I had demanded it on training fields and in command centers a world away. But here, in my own backyard, I didn't even know how to ask for it. My eyes were fixed on that small, forgotten box on the picnic table. The cheerful floral wrapping paper seemed to mock me, a bright spot of color in a sea of beige potato salad and brown beer bottles. A gift meant to represent a shared past, now just another piece of clutter at a party. But as I stared at it, my mind drifted from that small, insignificant gift to a much larger one. A gift that wasn't wrapped in paper or tied with a bow. A gift that had cost me everything. The memory came flooding back, as clear as if it were yesterday instead of 3 years ago. I was freshly back from my deployment in Afghanistan, the dust of Kandahar still clinging to my soul. Mark and Rachel had driven down to my small rental house to welcome me home. We sat on the cramped porch, drinking sweet tea from mason jars as the cicadas buzzed their deafening summer song. The air was thick with hope. Mark, then, was all ambition and charm. He leaned forward, his eyes alight, painting a picture of his future. He wanted to start his own private security firm. It was a solid plan. He was a former Marine corporal. He knew the business. He talked about contracts, growth, and a big house with a white picket fence for Rachel. He spoke of a life where my sister would never have to worry about anything ever again. I'll take care of her, Elle. I promise, he'd said, looking me straight in the eye. And I'll pay you back double. This is a sure thing. I looked at Rachel. Her face was glowing, her eyes shining with absolute adoration for the man beside her. She saw the same bright future he was painting. In that moment, all I wanted was to make that future a reality for her. I wanted my little sister to have the stability and happiness I felt I couldn't have for myself. So I did it. I went inside, logged into my bank account, and transferred the entire balance of my savings to him. $30,000. Every last cent I had saved from my combat pay. It was money I'd earmarked for a small piece of land, a quiet spot in the country where I could one day build a little cabin and finally find some peace. But watching Rachel's hopeful smile, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This felt better. I wasn't just buying a piece of land, I was investing in my family's happiness. For the first few months, it felt like the best investment I'd ever made. Mark was endlessly grateful. There were phone calls, texts, thank yous every other day. Couldn't have done it without you, Elle, he'd say. You're a lifesaver. The business took off, just as he'd predicted. But then, the calls became less frequent. The thank yous trickled to a stop. They were replaced by stories of his own brilliance, his business savvy, his knack for closing deals. The narrative slowly shifted. It was no longer a business we had helped build. It was the empire he had built himself. The $30,000 debt was never mentioned again. One afternoon, I tried to ask about it gently. Hey, Rach, just wondering how the business is doing. Things looking stable enough to start thinking about that loan? She'd waved a dismissive hand, not even looking up from her phone. Oh, Elle, you know how busy Mark is. He's got a million things on his plate. We'll get to it eventually. We're family, right? That was the line. We're family. It was the excuse that was meant to erase all debts and silence all questions. The real cruelty, the part that still twists a knife in my gut, is that the mockery only began after he became successful. After my money had built his foundation. That Christmas, he handed me a small, gaudily wrapped gift. I opened it to find a cheap, gold-plated clipboard. Engraved on the clip were the words, "Sergeant Paperwork." He howled with laughter. My parents chuckled politely. Rachel smiled. And I smiled too. I had to. But inside, I felt something crack. It wasn't a joke. It was a statement. It was his way of reducing my sacrifice, my entire career, into a silly, meaningless title. It was a public declaration that the money I'd bled for was worth nothing more than a cheap gag gift. But the final, deepest cut came about a year ago. I'd come by my parents' house to drop something off, and I heard Rachel and Mom talking in the kitchen. I stopped outside the screen door, my hand frozen on the handle. "I just don't know what to say when Mark's friends ask what she does," Rachel was saying, her voice laced with a familiar whine. "It's so embarrassing. I just say she works for the government. It sounds more respectable." I could hear the scrape of a chair and my mother's long, weary sigh. "Well, she chose that path, Rachel. What can you do?" "But they think of soldiers as these big, scary guys who yell all the time," Rachel pressed on. "Not her. Not her." I stood there, rooted to the spot, the world tilting under my feet. The air felt thin, hard to breathe. Mark's disrespect was one thing. He was an insecure bully trying to feel big. But this was different. This was my own sister, my own mother, ashamed of me. Ashamed of the uniform I wore with pride, the service that had paid for the very business that gave her the comfortable life she was so proud of. I realized then that their shame hurt more than any insult Mark could ever dream up. It was a deeper, more profound kind of betrayal. I remember standing there, thinking about a sermon I heard as a child from Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind. I always thought my patience with them was a form of love. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just enabling their cruelty. If you've ever poured your heart and soul into helping a family member, only to be taken for granted or made to feel small, please support this story by hitting the like button, and in the comments below, just type the words, "I understand." Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. The chaotic noise of the barbecue, the forced laughter, the clinking bottles, Mark's booming voice, faded away, replaced by a different kind of sound. A steady, rhythmic hum. The low thrum of servers, the whisper of ventilation, and the gentle, constant tapping of keyboards. This was the sound of my sanctuary. The Tactical Operations Center, the TOC. I pushed through the double doors and the world outside ceased to exist. Here, the only light was the cool, blue-white glow from a dozen different monitors, painting shifting patterns on the faces of the soldiers on duty. This place was my arena. In this room, there was no ambiguity, no passive aggression, no need for fake smiles. Everything was governed by logic, by competence, by the unwavering trust you place in the person next to you. Your family name didn't matter. Your brother-in-law's opinion didn't matter. All that mattered was whether you could do your job. "Morning, Sergeant Russo," a young specialist said, his eyes not leaving the satellite map on his screen. "Morning, Specialist. Status on the readiness inspection checklists." 80% complete, Sergeant. Awaiting final munitions logs from Alpha Company. Copy that. Keep me posted. I moved to my station, the command console at the heart of the room. I put on my headset and the world narrowed to the flow of information. For the next 12 hours, I was the nerve center. I coordinated troop movements, tracked unit locations, processed intelligence reports, and ensured that hundreds of soldiers had what they needed to do their jobs safely. My voice, when I spoke into the mic, was unrecognizable from the quiet woman at the barbecue. Here, it was calm, clear, and absolute. It was a voice of authority. We were in the final stages of preparation for a major readiness inspection, and the pressure was immense. Every piece of equipment, every soldier's training record, every bullet had to be accounted for. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of purpose. My eyes scanned a digital map of a training sector, and for a split second, the grid coordinates blurred and reformed into another map, another time. A dusty corner of Afghanistan. And with it came the face of Private First Class Miller. He was 19. A farm boy from Ohio with a goofy smile who could barely grow a mustache. He was on patrol when his unit was ambushed. I was the one coordinating their fire support that day. I was thousands of miles away, in a room just like this one, a voice in a headset. I can still hear the panic in his squad leader's voice over the radio, the crackle of gunfire in the background. My hands had moved with cold precision, calling in coordinates, directing air support, doing everything by the book. But I was still just a voice. I couldn't be there. I couldn't stop the bleeding. We got the rest of them out. We didn't get Miller. I carry that memory with me every single day. It's the reason I check every detail 3 times. It's the reason I push my soldiers to their limits. It's the reason I don't sleep most nights before an inspection. Because I know that a single misplaced decimal point on a map, a single piece of faulty equipment, isn't just a logistical error. It's a kid from Ohio who doesn't get to go home. And Mark, in his blissful, arrogant ignorance, had the audacity to say I sit in an air-conditioned office and push paper. He had no idea what ghosts lived in these rooms. The shift dragged on. At 3 a.m, during a rare moment of quiet, I retreated to my small, windowless office. The exhaustion was bone-deep, a mix of physical fatigue and the emotional drain from the weekend. I sat there in the silence, feeling utterly and completely alone. I pulled out my phone, not to check for messages, but to find a familiar comfort. I opened YouTube and played a video I'd watched 100 times. It was Brené Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability. Her voice filled the small office, steady and certain. I listened to her quote Theodore Roosevelt, the one about the man in the arena. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. The words resonated deep within me. This place, this talk, was my arena. My face might not be covered in actual blood, but I was in the fight. I was making decisions that had life or death consequences. My family, they weren't even in the arena. They were spectators. They were the ones in the cheap seats, pointing and criticizing the person who was actually daring to be great. Vulnerability is not weakness, Brené's voice continued. It's our greatest measure of courage. It hit me like a physical shock. All these years, I thought my silence, my refusal to cause conflict, was a sign of strength. I thought I was being patient, being the bigger person. But it wasn't strength. It was fear. I was avoiding the vulnerability of standing up for myself, of facing the potential wreckage it might cause in my family. I was avoiding my own arena at home. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. You leave so early? Busy saving the world again? The winking emoji felt like a drop of poison. Usually a message like that would send a fresh wave of hurt through me. I would have agonized over how to respond, or if I should respond at all. But tonight, hearing it after those powerful words, something was different. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, cold clarity. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing. It was the detached calm of a commander assessing a threat. I looked at the text, then at the massive tactical board on my wall, covered in maps and unit markers and mission objectives. I didn't type a reply. I just put the phone down, face down, on my desk. A decision had been made, silently, in the sterile quiet of a 3 a.m. office. I was done being a spectator in my own life. The next battle wouldn't be fought on a map or over a radio. It would be fought in my own family. And for the first time, I was going to show up ready for the fight. The cold resolve I had felt earlier began to fray at the edges. A decision made in the sterile logic of 3 a.m. feels very different in the harsh fluorescent light of the next day. The sheer weight of the impending inspection, combined with the sleepless night and the raw, open wound of my family's betrayal, was starting to crush me. I sat alone in my office, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My gaze drifted to a framed photo on my desk. It was from last Christmas. All of us, Mom, Dad, Rachel, Mark, and me, posed in front of the fireplace, wearing festive sweaters. Everyone was smiling. My own smile in the picture looked painful, a tight, forced curve of the lips that didn't reach my eyes. Looking at it, I felt a profound sense of alienation, as if I were looking at a stranger who just happened to share my face. This was supposed to be my family, my safe harbor. Why did it feel like I was a foreigner in my own life? A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I swiped it away angrily, but it was too late. The door creaked open. Sergeant Davis stood there, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He was one of my best non-commissioned officers, young, only about 25, but whip-smart and fiercely competent. He was a young black man from Atlanta, and I was mentoring him for a promotion to staff sergeant. He took in the scene, the cold coffee, the exhaustion on my face, the faint shimmer of the tear I'd tried to hide. He didn't say a word. He just walked in, placed one of the hot mugs on my desk right next to the cold one, and stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. The rich, dark aroma of fresh coffee filled the small room. Then, he spoke, his voice quiet and respectful. "Sergeant First Class, you taught us we're supposed to take care of our soldiers." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But sometimes the leadership needs taking care of too." He looked me directly in the eye, and his expression was one of simple, profound kindness. "It's okay to be human, ma'am, even in the uniform." His words, a lesson I had drilled into him and every other NCO under my command, were now being handed back to me like a gift. The professional wall I had so carefully constructed around myself began to crumble. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like Sergeant First Class Russo, the unflappable operations NCO. I just felt like Eloise, a woman who was tired and hurting. In a rare moment of vulnerability, I decided to let him in. Just a little. "It's been a rough weekend, Davis," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "Family stuff. Sometimes I feel like the work we do here isn't understood." He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just listened, his gaze steady and attentive. He nodded slowly when I finished. Then he shared a piece of his own story. "I get that, ma'am. More than you know." He leaned against the doorframe, cradling his own mug. "My folks. They're good people. But they wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor. When I enlisted, they were devastated. To this day, they still don't get it. They think my job is just playing with guns in the woods." He shook his head, a wry, sad smile on his face. "They don't see the honor in it. They just see the thing that took their son away from the life they planned for him." His honesty was a balm on my own raw nerves. His story was different, but the feeling was the same. That deep, aching loneliness that comes from being misunderstood by the people who are supposed to know you best. For the first time all weekend, I didn't feel alone. I thought of one of the 7 Army values we are taught to live by: loyalty. We're taught it means bearing true faith and allegiance to the Constitution, the Army, and your unit. But sitting there with Sergeant Davis, I realized loyalty also meant being true to your comrades, and most importantly, being loyal to yourself and the honor of your own path. We didn't talk anymore about our families. The conversation shifted back to work, to the inspection, to a new piece of surveillance software we were integrating. But the air in the room had changed. A new bond had been forged, an unspoken understanding that went deeper than rank. We were just 2 soldiers, from different generations, different races, different backgrounds, who had found common ground in the solitary honor of our chosen profession. A while later, as he was about to leave, he turned back at the door. He stood a little straighter, his posture shifting from a relaxed comrade back to a respectful soldier. "Sergeant First Class," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Regardless of what anyone on the outside says, what you do in here matters. You've saved a lot of lives, ma'am." He paused, and his next words struck me with the force of a physical impact. Mine included. He was referring to a training exercise months ago, where my quick analysis of conflicting reports had averted a serious accident. I had just considered it part of my job. I never knew he was there. He gave a slight nod and then was gone, leaving me alone with my now warm coffee and his words hanging in the air, mine included. That one sentence, offered freely by a subordinate who owed me nothing more than professional courtesy, was worth more than a lifetime of praise I had so desperately craved from my family. It was real, it was earned, and it was enough. It was more than enough. The warmth from Sergeant Davis's words lingered for a few precious hours, a fragile shield against the world. I felt seen, validated. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that I had the strength to navigate what was coming. But that feeling of peace was shattered by the shrill, jarring ring of my cell phone. Caller ID, Mom. My stomach instantly clenched. The shield evaporated. I let it ring twice, 3 times, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But I knew it was useless. She would just keep calling. Steeling myself, I answered. Hello? Eloise. Oh, thank God. Where have you been? The whole family's been worried sick about you. Her voice was a masterclass in feigned concern, laced with an undercurrent of accusation. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what had happened. She dove straight into a recital of the chaos my actions had supposedly caused. Rachel's been crying her eyes out ever since you left, you know. Just inconsolable, she said, her voice dripping with melodrama. And Mark. Well, he's just sitting there, quiet as a stone. It's terrifying. I've never seen him like this. You really did a number on him. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. She was painting me as the villain, the one who had disrupted the peace. She deployed her favorite weapons, words like family breaking apart and your responsibility as the older sister, each one a carefully aimed dart designed to wrap me in chains of guilt. I remained silent, letting her talk, recognizing the strategy. This was the opening salvo. The main attack was still to come. When my silence made it clear that her initial guilt trip wasn't working, her tone shifted. She lowered her voice, becoming confidential, as if sharing a terrible secret. Honey, there's something you don't know. The reason Mark is so on edge lately. Here it comes, I thought. The ace up her sleeve. His business, she whispered. It's in trouble, real trouble. He's on the verge of losing everything, Eloise. He's been trying to keep it from Rachel, trying to be strong for her, but he's falling apart. She let that sink in, a calculated pause for maximum effect. Then she delivered the payload. Do you want to see your sister homeless, Eloise? Is your little bit of wounded pride worth throwing her out on the street? The words were a physical blow, a vicious, targeted strike right at my weakest point, my love for Rachel. She had taken my legitimate self-defense and twisted it into a selfish, petty act. In her narrative, I was no longer a victim of disrespect. I was the cruel sister willing to sacrifice her family's well-being over a minor spat. Mom, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This isn't about wounded pride. This is about years of disrespect. It wasn't a joke. She cut me off, her voice snapping back to its sharp, dismissive edge. Disrespect? For heaven's sake, Eloise, you're a sergeant first class. He's just a kid trying to make a name for himself. You're supposed to be the mature one, the one with the thick skin. You should be more gracious. Then came the final, brutal twist of the knife. Or has the army taught you to forget what it means to be family? Sometimes I wonder if it's beaten all the feeling right out of you, made you cold and unfeeling like this. That was it. That was the line. She hadn't just dismissed my feelings. She had weaponized my career against me. She took the very thing that gave me my strength, my honor, my identity, and branded it as the source of my inhumanity. She was blaming the uniform for my refusal to accept their abuse. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The frantic, churning sea of hurt and anger suddenly went still. I thought of the military principle of mission command. The commander gives you the objective and the intent, but it's up to you to figure out how to execute the mission on the ground. For years, my family's unspoken mission for me was keep the peace at all costs. But my new mission, the one I had given myself at 3 a.m. in my office, was self-respect. And I had to decide how to execute it right now, regardless of the orders from my high command. I took a deep, steadying breath. I thought of Brené Brown's words on courage. I thought of Sergeant Davis's quiet support. I was not the solitary, undefended soldier she thought I was. When I spoke again, my voice was slow, deliberate, and devoid of the emotion she was trying to provoke. It was the voice I used in the talk key. "Mom," I said, the single word cutting through her impending tirade. "I need some time." She started to interrupt, but I kept going, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I am not going to discuss this with you right now." And before she could formulate a response, before she could launch another volley of guilt, I did something I had never done in my entire life. I hung up. I ended the call. The silence that filled my apartment afterward was deafening. It was louder than any argument, more powerful than any shouted word. It was the sound of a border being drawn, a line in the sand. It was the sound of my first real act of defiance, and it was terrifying, and it was liberating. And just like that, I was back at the party. The oppressive heat, the smell of burnt sugar from the barbecue sauce, the sound of cheap beer cans being popped open. All the pain, the history, the phone call with my mother. It all coalesced into this single, unbearable moment. I wasn't just standing in my parents' backyard anymore. I was standing at the epicenter of 12 years of disrespect. Mark was drunk, buoyed by the laughter of his friends and the cheap confidence of a few too many Bud Lights. He was the king of this little backyard kingdom, and he needed to make sure everyone knew it. He spotted me standing by the drink cooler and waved me over with a dismissive flick of his wrist, a gesture you'd use for a dog. "Hey, sister-in-law, get over here," he slurred, a sloppy grin on his face. "We're talking call signs. You know, cool names for real soldiers. Every grunt in the field's got one." He leaned in, his breath sour. "I bet even you've got one, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a trap. I could feel the eyes of a dozen people turn towards me. His friends, my parents, Rachel. They were an audience, waiting for the punchline of a joke they'd heard 100 times before. The joke was me. I simply nodded. That was his mistake. My quiet compliance was the bait, and he took it hook, line, and sinker. He thought I was playing along, ready to offer up some bland, administrative nickname he could tear apart. He puffed out his chest and began his performance. "All right, let's guess," he boomed to the crowd. "What's the call sign for our favorite paper pusher? How about the Queen of Spreadsheets?" A wave of laughter. I saw Rachel's smile, a flash of white that felt like a betrayal. No, I got a better one," another guy yelled. "The Governor of Clipboards." More laughter, louder this time. Mark was beaming, feeding off their energy. He wasn't done. He took a piece of paper towel, crumpled it, and mimed stamping it with a loud ka-chunk nurse sound. "I know, her call sign is approved." The laughter peaked, a chorus of mockery that washed over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. The roaring laughter became a distant buzz. I saw everything with a chilling clarity. The smug satisfaction on Mark's face. The flicker of discomfort in my mother's eyes, quickly suppressed. My father's gaze fixed firmly on the patch of grass by his feet. And Rachel? She was laughing, her hand over her mouth, but her eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading look as if to say, "Just let it go, Elle. Please. Just let it go." But I couldn't. Not anymore. I waited. I let the last of the laughter die out. I let the silence stretch, becoming heavy, awkward. Every eye was still on me, waiting for my reaction. Waiting for me to smile weakly and accept my place as the family joke. I lifted my head and looked directly into Mark's eyes. My voice, when it came out, was not my own. It was the voice from the talk. It was perfectly level, devoid of heat, and as cold and sharp as a piece of shrapnel. Wraith 7. The effect was instantaneous. It was like a switch had been flipped, cutting all sound in the backyard. Across the circle of friends, a man named Morales, A Marine gunnery sergeant Mark had been trying to impress all day, dropped his plastic cup of beer. It hit the grass with a dull thud. His entire demeanor changed in a single heartbeat. The casual, bored curiosity in his eyes vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His gaze shot down to the name tape. Russo, stitched above my pocket, as if seeing it for the first time, as if the letters themselves were glowing. Wraith? 7, he stammered, the words barely a whisper. Then something incredible happened. His training, his very identity as a career military man, took over. His back straightened, his shoulders squared. He snapped to a crisp, instinctive position of parade rest. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was a reflex of pure, unadulterated respect. He cleared his throat, his voice now formal, stripped of all its earlier familiarity. Sergeant First Class, he said, his eyes locked on mine. My apologies. I didn't realize. The silence that followed was absolute. Mark's smug grin had frozen, then melted from his face, leaving behind a slack-jawed expression of confusion and panic. His friends stared, their mouths hanging open. Rachel's hand had dropped from her face, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The barbecue was over. The party was done. And in the deafening silence, a 12-year-old dynamic had just been utterly and completely annihilated. That feeling, when the entire world shifts on a single word, it's something you never forget. If you've ever had a moment where you finally stood your ground and refused to be the punchline anymore, hit that like button to show your support. And in the comments, just write one word: honor. Let's fill the comments with it as a tribute to every person who has ever had to fight to reclaim their own. The suffocating silence in the backyard was finally broken by Mark. He stammered, his face pale and blotchy, the drunken confidence completely gone. What the hell is Wraith 7? All eyes turned from me to Gunny Morales. The gunnery sergeant took a slow breath, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy, stripped of any and all humor. It was the voice of a man who had seen war. Wraith 7, he said, his gaze sweeping over Mark and his stunned friends, is not a name you joke about. He looked back at Mark, his eyes hard as flint. It's the call sign for the senior battle captain who coordinated all ground support firepower in the Anbar province, specifically in a little piece of hell we called the Triangle of Death, back in EOS 7. He let the name of that infamous region hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. And the person behind that call sign, he said, his voice low and intense, saved my life, and the lives of 52 other United States Marines. The world seemed to stop. No one moved. No one breathed. Gunny Morales began to speak, and it was as if he was transporting all of us from this quiet North Carolina backyard to the dust and chaos of Iraq. We were on a convoy escort mission outside Fallujah, he began. Standard procedure, but it was a setup. They hit us from 3 sides at once. RPGs, machine gun fire. It was a textbook L-shaped ambush. We were pinned down in the kill zone, taking casualties. Our vehicles were disabled. We were dead in the water. He wasn't just telling a story, he was reliving it. His voice took on a strained, haunted quality. The air was so thick with dust and smoke you couldn't see 10 feet. The radio was chaos. Everyone was screaming at once. We were returning fire, but they had us zeroed in. We were getting picked apart. We called for CAS, close air support, but the situation was a nightmare. The enemy was right on top of us, less than 50 meters away. We call that danger close. One wrong coordinate, one slight miscalculation from a pilot miles up in the sky, and they drop a 500-pound bomb right on our heads. Game over. He paused, swallowing hard. We were getting desperate. I remember our radio operator screaming for support, saying we were being overrun. And then, this voice came over the net. It was the calmest voice I've ever heard in my life. No panic, no fear. Just pure, ice-cold control. All she said was, Voodoo 1, this is Wraith 7. I have you. Stand by for fire mission. Gunny's eyes found mine across the yard. I didn't look away. I couldn't. I was right back there with him, staring at a screen, the lives of his men represented by tiny blue icons surrounded by a sea of red. For the next 15 minutes, he continued, his own voice now trembling with the memory. That voice was God. She was a goddamn orchestra conductor of violence. While we were hugging the dirt, she was coordinating artillery strikes from a base 10 miles away, Apache helicopter gun runs, and bombing passes from 2 F-18s circling overhead. At the same time, she was talking to pilots traveling at 500 miles per hour, telling them exactly where to put their ordnance, danger close, with zero margin for error. We could hear the jets screaming overhead, feel the ground shake as the bombs hit. And every single time, they landed exactly where she said they would. With every explosion that wasn't on top of us, we knew we had another few seconds to breathe, to fight, to live. After 15 minutes that felt like an eternity, the enemy broke. They were gone. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling. We did a head count. Wounded, yes. But every single one of us, all 53 Marines in that convoy, made it back to base that day. We all went home to our families. Because of Wraith 7. The backyard was utterly silent now. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets in the tall grass and the forgotten sizzle of the pork on the grill. They sounded unnaturally loud. Gunny Morales turned his body fully towards me. He straightened his shoulders and pulled his feet together, assuming the formal position of attention. It was a mark of profound respect, an honor guard of one. Sergeant First Class Russo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. On behalf of my brothers, the men who are alive today because of you, I apologize. Our ignorance is inexcusable. He gave a short, sharp nod. Thank you for your service. I simply nodded back once. My throat was too tight to speak. I let my gaze drift from his respectful face to Mark's, which was ashen with shame. Then to Rachel, whose face was streaked with silent, stunned tears. This wasn't a victory. It was just the truth. A truth that had a weight and a gravity all its own. I spoke one final sentence, not to Gunny, not to Mark, but to the broken pieces of what I once called my family. I have to get back to my unit. And with that, I turned my back on all of them and walked away. The crunch of Eloise's Jeep tires on the gravel driveway was the last sound of normalcy. As the red taillights disappeared down the road, a vacuum of stunned silence settled over the backyard. The party hadn't ended. It had imploded. The first to move was Gunny Morales. He walked over to the trash can, deliberately dropped his half-empty cup into it, and turned to Mark's remaining friends. He didn't need to say a word. One by one, they began to disperse. There were no loud goodbyes, no claps on the back, just a series of awkward, tight-lipped nods in the direction of Mark and the Russo parents. They mumbled excuses about having to get home, their eyes avoiding contact. They couldn't leave fast enough. They were civilians caught in the blast radius of a truth they weren't equipped to handle, fleeing the scene of their own ignorant humiliation. Within 5 minutes, the backyard was empty, save for the 4 people who remained. The abandoned picnic table, littered with the festive debris of a birthday party, now looked like the wreckage of a shipwreck. The silence was no longer stunned. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with unspoken accusations. Rachel broke it. Her body had been trembling, but now the trembling erupted into a full-blown sob of fury. She spun on Mark, her face blotchy and wet with tears of shame. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice raw. "You just had to do it, didn't you? You just had to be the big man. You turned my birthday party into a stage to humiliate my own sister." Mark, who had been staring blankly at the spot where Eloise had stood, flinched as if struck. The alcohol had curdled in his veins, replaced by the cold dread of public disgrace. He tried to defend himself, but his voice was weak, pathetic. "How was I supposed to know? She never says anything. She just stands there." "Because that's what we do, Mark," Rachel's voice cracked, a hysterical edge creeping in. "That's what this family does. We stay quiet, we pretend. And you? You just had to poke the bear." She took a step closer, jabbing a finger at his chest. "This is all your fault. You and your stupid, insecure ego always have to be the best, the toughest, the real soldier in the room." Then her anger turned inward, her voice breaking with self-loathing. "And look what you made me. Look what I let you make me. A fool, laughing at my own sister's sacrifice. Now, children, that's enough, their mother started, her hands fluttering nervously as she began to clear paper plates from the table. Her instinct, as always, was to clean up the mess, to restore the appearance of order. The guests are all gone. Let's not say things we can't take back. Be quiet, Helen. The voice was low, gravelly, and utterly unexpected. Everyone froze. The Russo patriarch, a man who had perfected the art of silent, passive agreement for 35 years of marriage, had just spoken. He had cut his own wife off. He took a step forward, away from the shadows of the porch, and looked directly at Mark. His eyes, which had been downcast all afternoon, were now filled with a profound, quiet disappointment that was more damning than any shout. He cleared his throat. "Pride goeth before destruction," he said, the words from Proverbs falling like stones into the silence. "And a haughty spirit before a fall." He shook his head slowly. "You disrespected my daughter, in my home." He looked from Mark to Rachel, and then to his wife. "You owe her an apology, son. But I think we all do. We all owe her an apology." His words stunned them into silence. Helen stared at her husband as if he were a stranger. Rachel's sobs hitched in her throat. Mark just looked down, his face a mask of shame, unable to meet the older man's gaze. The father had finally shown up to the battle, but the war was already lost. The moment of truth passed, and the fragile unity his words had created shattered. There was no grand resolution, no tearful reconciliation, just the ugly, messy fallout. Rachel let out a choked cry, turned, and ran into the house. A moment later, the sharp slam of her bedroom door echoed through the backyard. Mark stood alone in the center of the lawn, a statue of disgrace, his empty beer cup still clutched in his hand. Helen and her husband stood on the porch, separated by a few feet of space that felt like a canyon. They looked at each other, and in that shared glance was the devastating recognition of their own failure. The peace they had worked so hard to maintain, the fragile truce bought with their older daughter's silence, had been a lie. And the truth, now that it was finally out, had burned their carefully constructed world to the ground. They hadn't just failed Eloise, they had failed their entire family. And they had no idea how to begin to pick up the pieces. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I don't remember the roads or the turns I made. All I remember is the feeling of escape, of putting distance between myself and the wreckage in my parents' backyard. When I finally walked through my own front door, the contrast was jarring. Here, there was silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence I had left behind, but a clean, peaceful quiet. My apartment was small, meticulously organized, a space governed by my own rules. The shoes were lined up by the door, the mail was stacked neatly on the counter. The air was still. This was my territory, the one place on earth I didn't have to apologize for existing. It was the sanctuary I'd built for myself, piece by deliberate piece. My first act was to take off my uniform. I unpinned my medals, unbuttoned the stiff jacket of the ASU, and hung it with care in my closet. It felt symbolic, like I was shedding a skin. I was taking off the version of me they saw, the rigid, unfeeling soldier, and trying to find the woman underneath. But the truth was, I wasn't sure who that was anymore. The uniform felt less like a costume and more like a part of my own body. Just as a sense of calm began to settle over me, my phone started to buzz on the kitchen counter. It didn't just buzz once. It lit up, vibrating incessantly, a frantic, desperate insect trying to break into my quiet space. I walked over and looked at the screen. It was a tidal wave. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, a string of 10, 12, 15 text messages from Rachel. My screen was a rolling feed of their panic, their regret, their chaos. "Mom, Eloise, please pick up. This is tearing us apart." Dad, "I'm sorry, Elle. Please call us." Rachel, "I'm so sorry. So sorry. So sorry. I'm a terrible sister. Please don't be mad at me. Please just answer me." I scrolled through them, my thumb moving mechanically. I read their pleas, their apologies, their accusations masked as concern. And I felt nothing. The burning anger was gone. The deep, aching hurt had subsided. All that was left was a vast, hollow emptiness, a profound and unshakable exhaustion. It was the emotional equivalent of surviving a battle. The adrenaline is gone, and all you're left with is the bone-deep fatigue and the ringing in your ears. I realized that to answer their calls, to reply to their texts, would be to re-enlist in a war I had just escaped. They weren't asking for my forgiveness. They were asking for my participation in their drama. Rachel's message, as heartfelt as it may have seemed, was all about her. Don't be mad at me, not, are you okay? They needed me to absorb their guilt, to soothe their panic, to restore their fractured peace. They needed me to be the bigger person, one more time. My finger hovered over Rachel's name. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I swiped up and activated the Do Not Disturb function. The screen went dark. The buzzing stopped. The silence of my apartment returned, now feeling less like emptiness and more like a fortress wall. My eyes fell on the photo on my small desk, the one from Christmas with all the forced smiles. For years, that picture had been a symbol of what I was fighting for, a reminder of the family I loved. But looking at it now, it was a lie. It wasn't a picture of love, it was a picture of my compliance, a portrait of my pain. Gently, I picked up the frame. I looked at each of their faces one last time, then opened the desk drawer and placed it inside, face down. I didn't want to throw it away, but I couldn't look at it anymore. I closed the drawer. In its place, I put up a different photo. It was a worn, candid shot of my platoon, taken after a grueling 3-week field exercise. We were all dirty, exhausted, covered in mud and camouflage paint. But we were grinning, our arms thrown around each other's shoulders. We were a chaotic, mismatched family of choice, bound together not by blood, but by shared hardship and mutual respect. That photo was the truth. It was where I belonged. I sat down on my couch and closed my eyes, the events of the day replaying in my mind. A piece of advice from my first command sergeant major, a tough-as-nails man named Williams, echoed in my memory. He'd been inspecting my uniform once, and he'd tapped the chevrons on my sleeve. "These stripes aren't just for show, Sergeant," he'd said, his voice like gravel. "They mean you know when to lead, when to follow, and when to walk away." When to walk away. I finally understood. Walking away wasn't an act of weakness or anger. It was a tactical decision. It was a strategic retreat to a defensible position. Responding to them now would just pull me back into the kill zone of their emotions. I needed space. I needed time to assess the damage, to rearm, to decide on the terms of engagement, if there were to be any engagement at all. For the first time in my life, I was putting my own well-being first. I was making my own emotional survival the primary mission. And the feeling was terrifying. But it was also the first true, clean breath of freedom I had taken in years. 8 weeks after the party, the humid North Carolina summer had given way to the first crisp hints of fall. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, making the final adjustments to my dress uniform. The fabric felt familiar, but something was different. Sewn onto the sleeves were the 3 chevrons and 3 rockers of a master sergeant. I had been selected for promotion. Looking at my reflection, I didn't feel a surge of giddy excitement. Instead, a deep, quiet calm settled over me. It wasn't the loud external validation I had once craved from my family. It was a quiet, internal confirmation, a sense of rightness. It was the world I had chosen, the world I had fought for, acknowledging my place in it. The promotion ceremony was held in the base auditorium. It was a formal affair, full of tradition and military precision. As I stood on the stage with the other promotees, I scanned the audience. And I saw them. My family. They were sitting in the back row, almost hidden in the shadows. My mother, my father, Rachel. And Mark. He was there too, wearing a neatly pressed suit and tie. From this distance, he looked smaller, diminished, the arrogant swagger completely gone. They sat quietly, not as proud participants, but as respectful, almost timid observers. Throughout the ceremony, Mark never once looked directly at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the stage, on the American flag, on anything but me. When my name was called, it was Command Sergeant Major Williams himself who walked out to pint on my new rank. As he did, I caught my mother's eye. She was crying. But these were not the tears of frustration or manipulation I was used to. These were quiet tears of what looked like regret, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of pride. After the ceremony, there was a small reception with cake and coffee in the community hall. My unit, my chosen family, surrounded me with handshakes, backslaps, and genuine congratulations. Sergeant Davis gave me a sharp salute and a wide grin. Knew it was only a matter of time, Master Sergeant. It felt good. It felt right. Then I saw Mark approaching. He moved hesitantly, a stark contrast to his usual bulldozing presence. He stopped a respectful distance away and waited for me to acknowledge him. Master Sergeant, he said, the title feeling strange but correct coming from his lips. His voice was quiet, sober. There's no excuse for how I acted. I was insecure, I was a bully, and I took it out on you. He finally looked me in the eye. I'm sorry. It wasn't a rambling, self-serving apology. It was direct. It was honest. He was owning his failure. I looked at him, not as my brother-in-law, the family clown, but as a man finally forced to confront his own shortcomings. I accept your apology, Mark, I said, my voice even. But building back trust will take time. It was an answer that held both compassion and a boundary. It was the truth. Forgiveness wasn't a magic wand that erased the past. It was the slow, difficult work of rebuilding on cleared ground. He simply nodded, accepting my terms, and then retreated back to Rachel's side. A moment later, Rachel came up to me. She didn't say much. She just looked at my new rank, at the uniform, at me. Then she wrapped her arms around me in a hug that was tight and real. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. I'm proud of you, Elle, she whispered. I'm really, really proud. And there it was, the one sentence I had spent a lifetime waiting to hear. It didn't fix everything. But it was a start. It was a single, perfect brick laid on a new foundation. Later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of my apartment, I stood before the mirror again. The new rank on my sleeve felt solid, earned. I thought about the two names that had come to define me, Wraith 7 and Master Sergeant Russo. Wraith 7 was a ghost, a voice in a headset who had saved 53 Marines she would never meet. But in a way, she had saved me too. She had been my secret weapon, the undeniable truth that had shattered a toxic silence and forced a confrontation that was 12 years overdue. She was the legacy of my past, a reminder of the weight I carried and the lives I had touched. Master Sergeant Russo. She was the future. She was the woman who had walked through the fire and come out stronger. She was the leader who understood that loyalty meant being true to her soldiers, but also to herself. I thought of a line from a poem by Maya Angelou that I'd always loved. I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. I felt the truth of that in my bones. I stood there not just as myself, but as a link in a long chain of soldiers who came before me, and as a testament to the quiet strength it takes to survive one's own family. The two names, the ghost and the leader, were finally one. They were both me, and I would never, ever make myself small again. Thank you for listening to my story. My journey was about finally answering to my own name, my own honor, and not the labels others tried to give me. I believe every one of us has a Wraith 7 inside, a strength we forget we possess until we're pushed to our absolute limit. Your arena might not be a battlefield, but your courage is just as real. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice and reclaiming your honor. Until next time, stand tall.